He had been there for so long that no one even noticed him anymore, an old dog, forgotten in the back of the kennel. Everyday families walked past him, choosing playful puppies, young and energetic dogs, but him he didn't even lift his head anymore. It was as if he already knew no one was going to pick him until one ordinary day a woman walked into the shelter and did something that no one had ever done before. What happened next will make you cry. The shelter was always noisy bark, whining, the constant chatter of visitors looking for the perfect dog, but he never barked anymore. In the last kennel, tucked away in a dimly lit corner of the shelter, lay Bruno, an elderly German shepherd, frail and tired. His once strong body was now thin, his fur dull and patchy, his deep brown eyes, once full of life, now held nothing but quiet acceptance. People walked past his kennel every single day. They stopped at the young dogs, the excited Labradors, the energetic Huskies, the tiny wagging tail puppies jumping against the fences. Bruno never moved. He had learned long ago that getting up, wagging his tail, or looking hopeful only led to disappointment. It was always the same. Families would come in, point at the puppies, laugh at the younger dogs, and walk right past him. Bruno watched day after day as every dog around him left. Some were adopted within hours, others took weeks, but he had been there for over a year. No one wanted an old, slow dog with cloudy eyes and stiff legs. The shelter workers tried their best. They made posts about him online, added a sign to his kennel, loyal and gentle, just needs a chance, but no one read it, no one cared. Bruno had stopped hoping, so when the door to the shelter swung open that morning, he didn't even look up. Why would he? It was just another day, another stranger who would ignore him, who would pick a younger, cuter dog. Except this time was different. A woman had just stepped inside, and for some reason she was looking right at him. Bruno didn't lift his head when the woman walked in. He had long since stopped expecting anything from people. The barking of younger dogs filled the shelter, tails wagging, paws scraping against metal fences, excited faces pressed against the kennel bars, tongues hanging out, hoping to be noticed. Bruno stayed in his corner, curled up on the thin blanket that barely cushioned the cold concrete floor. But something was different this time. The usual footsteps of visitors passed by, fast, distracted, moving straight toward the younger dogs. Except for one pair of footsteps, they stopped right in front of his kennel. Bruno hesitated, then slowly lifted his tired head. A woman stood there, kneeling down to his level. She wasn't looking at the puppies, she wasn't pointing at the energetic, bouncing dogs, she was looking at him. Bruno blinked, confused. Nobody ever stopped for him. Elena Foster, 44 years old, had only come to the shelter to look. She wasn't planning to adopt. Her hands rested on her thighs as she crouched down, looking through the rusty bars of the kennel at the thin, unmoving German shepherd. His fur was faded, patches missing from age and neglect. His graying mother rested on his paws, and his brown eyes, they weren't just sad, they were defeated. Something inside Elena's chest tightened. She had seen plenty of shelter dogs before, but this one, he wasn't barking for attention, he wasn't wagging his tail trying to charm his way into a home he had given up, and that shattered her heart. A shelter worker approached, glancing at Bruno's kennel. "Are you interested in one of the younger ones?" she asked kindly. "We have some great German Shepherd mixes in the next row." "No," Elena cut in softly, her eyes never left Bruno. "Tell me about this one." The worker hesitated. "Oh, Bruno, he's been here for over a year now." Elena swallowed hard. "A year? Has anyone ever shown interest?" The worker sighed, shaking her head. "No. People want puppies, younger dogs. They take one look at him and walk away." Elena pressed her lips together, then slowly extended her hand through the kennel bars. Bruno didn't move. She could see the hesitation in his tired eyes. Would she be like the others? Would she give him a moment of hope only to walk away? Elena waited, her fingers resting just inside the kennel. Bruno shifted slightly, just enough to sniff her fingertips, and in that tiny movement everything changed. She had felt it, the smallest, most fragile piece of hope still left inside him, and she wasn't going to let it die. Bruno had seen hands reach toward him before, hands that patted the younger dog's, hands that lingered at his kennel for a second before pulling away. This time felt different. Elena's fingers remained still, resting just inside the metal bars. She didn't force him to come closer. She waited. Bruno hesitated, his cloudy brown eyes studied her, searching for something. Would she leave? Would she just be another stranger who stopped, pied him for a moment, and then moved on? His frail body tensed as he sniffed her hand. The scent was different from the others, not like perfume, not like the artificial smell of the shelter workers. Smelled warm, familiar, like home. His ears twitched slightly. She didn't pull away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Bruno lifted his head just a little. Elena swallowed hard the moment his nose touched her hand. Something inside her cracked. This was not just an old dog. This was a dog who had given up on being loved, and somehow in that single fragile movement he had just let her in. The shelter worker standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Bruno doesn't react to most people, she admitted. He spends most of the day sleeping. He hardly eats. Elena's fingers curled slightly. Hardly eats. She glanced at the untouched food bowl inside the kennel. Her chest tightened. He wasn't just forgotten, he was fing away. She exhaled, finally breaking her silence. Why was he surrendered? The worker hesitated before answering. His owner passed away. The family didn't want him. They brought him here and never came back. Elena felt her throat tighten. Bruno had lost everything, his home, his person, his purpose, and now he was just waiting for nothing. The worker sighed. We've tried. We've posted about him online, put his story on flyers, even reduced his adoption fee, but people want younger dogs, active dogs. Bruno, she trailed off, shaking her head. No one wants a senior dog. Elena slowly stood up, still looking at Bruno. His eyes were locked onto her now, not hopeful, not excited, just waiting, like he was trying to understand something, like he was trying to figure out why, after all this time, someone was really looking at him. The weight of it was suffocating. Elena clenched her jaw. No one wants a senior dog. She felt the anger simmer beneath her skin. Then I guess I'm no one. She turned to the shelter worker and said 5 words that changed everything. I want to meet him. The shelter worker blinked. You want to meet him? Elena nodded without hesitation. Yes, she expected the worker to smile, to be happy that someone had finally shown interest in Bruno, but instead she sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. I have to be honest with you, Bruno doesn't do well outside his kennel. Elena frowned. What do you mean? The worker motioned toward the gate. Come with me, you'll see. Bruno hadn't left his kennel in weeks. Even when the staff tried to walk him, he would take a few hesitant steps, then stop. Some dogs pull at their leashes, eager to go outside. But Bruno, he just stood there waiting to go back inside, like he didn't believe there was a reason to leave. The worker unlatched the kennel door and slowly stepped inside. Bruno didn't move. His deep brown eyes flickered toward Elena, as if asking, are you still here? Elena's chest tightened. She crouched down, staying at his level. Come on, buddy, she whispered softly. Let'n go outside for a little bit. Bruno didn't react. Did he even understand what she was saying? Did he even care? The worker carefully slipped a leash over his neck. Bruno tensed, his frail body stiffening. Elena held her breath, and then he stood up, not eagerly, not with energy, but slowly, carefully. His stiff legs trembled, his thin frame struggling to hold his weight. Elena could see every rib beneath his dull fur. He was so much weaker than she realized. Her heart ached, but she didn't say a word. She just held the leash, gently giving him time. Bruno took one step, then another, and then he stopped. He wouldn't move any further. The shelter worker sighed. This is what I meant. He doesn't trust it. He spent so long inside the kennel that he doesn't know what to do anymore. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. This wasn't just a dog that needed a home. This was a dog that had forgotten how to live. She wasn't just going to have to rescue him. She was going to have to bring him back to life. Elena knelt beside him again. Bruno looked up at her for the first time. She saw something new in his eyes. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was a question. He was wondering, can I trust you? Elena reached out and gently stroked his head. She whispered two words that would change everything. Let's go. And this time, Bruno took another step forward. Bruno's legs trembled as he stepped out of the kennel. The open space of the shelter's outdoor area stretched before him, just a simple fenced-in yard with patches of dry grass, a few old chew toys scattered around. To most dogs it was freedom. To Bruno it was unknown. He hesitated at the threshold, his frail body stiff with uncertainty. The fresh air ruffled his dull fur. His ears twitched at the distant sound of barking, but he didn't move. Elena knelt beside him, holding the leash loosely in her hand. It's okay, Bruno, she said softly. We can take it slow. Bruno lowered his head slightly, eyes scanning the ground. His tail remained tucked, his posture hesitant, but he was outside for the first time in months, maybe longer. Elena stayed still, waiting. She wasn't going to force him. She wasn't going to rush him. Bruno took a single step, then another. His movements were slow, uncertain. His legs were still weak, his breathing heavy from the small effort. But he was trying, and for the first time, Elena saw his nose lift slightly, sniffing the air. Something inside her tightened. That small movement, just a breath of fresh air, was proof. Bruno wanted to believe, maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't done with him yet. The shelter worker leaned against the fence, watching in quiet disbelief. I've never seen him like this, she admitted. He usually just stands by the door waiting to go back inside. Elena glanced at Bruno, her fingers tightening around the leash. Maybe he's just been waiting for the right person. The worker exhaled. Are you sure you want to do this? Taking in a senior dog is not easy. Elena looked back at Bruno, his graying muzzle, his thin frame, the way his deep brown eyes looked at her now, not with expectation, not even with hope, but with something quieter, trust. He had lost everything, his home, his person, his purpose, but she wasn't going to let him lose his last chance. Elena turned to the worker. Her voice was steady. I'm sure. The worker nodded, a small smile appearing. Then Leighton, do the paperwork. Elena exhaled, turning back to Bruno. She crouched down, meeting his eyes. What do you say, big guy? Bruno blinked slowly, his tired body still, his expression unreadable. Then for the first time he wagged his tail. It was weak, barely a movement, but it was enough. Bruno had never ridden in a car before, at least not that he could remember. Elena had to lift him gently into the back seat, his frail body too weak to jump. He didn't resist, he simply let himself be carried, his deep brown eyes scanning her face as if still trying to understand why she was doing this. She settled him onto a soft blanket and shut the door. Then for the first time he wasn't in a kennel, he wasn't behind bars, he wasn't in the cold, empty shelter. He was in a car going somewhere home. The ride was quiet. Bruno lay curled up in the back, his breathing slow and steady. Elena kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He looked so small for such a big dog, so tired. Every bump in the road made him shift slightly, his thin frame adjusting on the blanket, but he didn't panic, he didn't whine. He Simply accepted it like a dog who had given up on fighting. Elena's hands tightened on the wheel. She had no idea what kind of life Bruno had before the shelter. She didn't know what he had been through, but she knew one thing for sure. He was never going back. When they arrived, Elena opened the car door and crouched down beside him. Bruno lifted his head, slightly blinking at his new surroundings. A small cozy house, a fenced yard, quiet, peaceful. Elena gently reached for his leash, giving it a soft tug. Come on, buddy, let's go inside. Bruno hesitated. He had stepped out of his kennel. He had stepped out of the shelter, but this was a home, and for a dog who had lost one before, that was terrifying. His deep brown eyes searched Elena's face as if waiting for reassurance. She smiled softly. You're safe now, Bruno. Bruno let out a small breath, then finally he took a step forward. Bruno's paws hesitantly touched the soft wooden floor of the house. He paused in the doorway, his deep brown eyes scanning the space. No cold concrete, no metal bars, no distant echoes of barking dogs, just quiet, just warmth. Elena let go of his leash, stepping back to give him space. Go ahead, big guy, this is yours now. Bruno's ears flicked slightly at her voice. He took another step forward, then another. His frail legs trembled slightly, his thin frame shifting unsteadily as he slowly explored the home. A soft dog bed lay near the fireplace, waiting for him. A fresh water bowl sat beside it. Everything was his for the first time in a very long time. He had a place of his own. Elena watched him carefully, giving him time. She knew better than to rush him. This wasn't just a house for him. This was trust, and trust takes time. Bruno sniffed the air. His tail remained low, uncertain, but then he did something unexpected. Instead of curling up on the dog bed, instead of lying down in the warmest spot, he walked to Elena, slow, hesitant, and then with the last bit of trust he had left in him, he rested his head against her leg. Elena's breath hitched. She reached down gently, running her fingers through his dull fur. You're safe now, Bruno. For the first time he let out a deep, heavy sigh. His tail, weak but finally free of fear, gave a single slow wag, and as at that moment Elena knew he understood. He was home. One woman did something incredible. Bruno was just another forgotten dog, a senior, overlooked, ignored, left behind by the world, left behind by hope. But sometimes all it takes is one person to change everything. One person to see the invisible, one person to say, you still matter. Elena didn't just rescue Bruno, she gave him back his dignity, his trust, his life, and in return Bruno gave her something even greater, a love that had been waiting just for her. Bruno wasn't broken, he was just waiting for someone to believe in him, and now he's home forever. How many other dogs like Bruno are still waiting? Dogs who have lost hope, dogs who just need one person to see them. If this story touched your heart, consider visiting your local shelter. There's a Bruno waiting for someone like you. Subscribe for more stories like this. And if you believe every dog deserves a second chance, leave a like and share this story.